She starts the argument again, and you can feel the atmosphere in the room tightening even before her voice rises. It begins subtly, an irritated tone, a sigh, a sharpened edge in her words, but within moments, it escalates into a full-scale emotional offensive. Her voice climbs higher and faster, gathering every imperfect moment, every forgotten detail, every slip or misstep you've ever made, no matter how insignificant, and stacking them into a towering psychological assault. These are not ordinary complaints. You can sense the precision behind each accusation. Each word is a carefully placed strike meant to destabilize your inner balance and pull you into an emotional battlefield you never volunteered for. She isn't just recalling events, she is reconstructing a narrative designed to corner you. The atmosphere becomes charged, almost electric, as though she's drawing power from your discomfort, hoping you will respond exactly as she expects, reactively, defensively, impulsively, and inside you, something stirs. That instinct, the deeply rooted, almost primal urge to defend yourself, to speak, to correct the record, to prove that you're not the villain she's painting you as. Your mind races, forming arguments, counter-arguments, examples, explanations, anything that can restore fairness to the situation. You feel a tightening in your chest, a pressure building as your reactive brain pushes you toward immediate action. Your lips part slightly. You can feel the words forming. The desire to speak, to fight, to retaliate through logic and reason becomes nearly overwhelming. It feels as if releasing those words might restore equilibrium, might make her see the truth, might bring an end to the accusation storm. But then, something shifts. A sudden, piercing realization strikes you with absolute clarity. If you engage, you lose by default. Not because you're wrong, not because you're weak, but because the battlefield isn't logical, it's emotional. And logic is powerless where emotion rules. You inhale slowly, deliberately, letting the air fill your lungs with calm. You shut your lips. The arguments dissolve unspoken. You look at her with an expression of steady, controlled neutrality, not aggression, not fear, just calm, unbreakable presence. And you say nothing. In that silence, something extraordinary happens. Your stillness becomes a shield stronger than anything you could say. The emotional force behind her words hits that shield and dissipates instantly. The air thickens with tension, not from you, but from the absence of the reaction she was relying on. Her emotional rhythm stutters. Her momentum breaks. She expected resistance, expected counter-arguments, expected fuel for escalation. Instead, she encounters a void, and in that void, her strategy collapses. Because the entire architecture of the argument, its intensity, its direction, its power, was built on the assumption that you would react. The battle required you to step into it, but you remained still, unmoved, untouchable. And suddenly, she has no opponent, no emotional target, no counterforce to push against. It is like watching a performer on stage suddenly realize the audience has vanished. Her energy, once directed outward, now circles back onto her. Confusion flickers in her eyes. Discomfort follows. She becomes self-aware in a way she wasn't moments earlier. Without your reactions to justify her anger, she is forced to confront her own escalating intensity. The psychological script she depends on, one built on emotional push and pull, glitches. She finds herself alone with the emotional storm she tried to unleash on you. And in that isolation, the storm begins to lose power. This is strategic silence, not the silence of running away, not the silence of fear, but the silence of control, absolute, deliberate, disciplined control. Strategic silence is not inaction, it is action of the highest order, the purest form of psychological self-command. It says, "My emotional state belongs to me, your storm cannot move me." This silence becomes your fortress, one no verbal attack can breach. And as the emotional storm weakens, a shift begins. A shift not only in the interaction, but in you. You are no longer reacting, you are leading without saying a single word. Most people think silence is the absence of communication, but silence, when used intentionally, communicates more powerfully than any argument ever could. To understand why, you must look deeper into the internal mechanics of emotional conflict, because strategic silence isn't random. It isn't luck. It is a deliberate psychological maneuver that only works when you understand the forces at play. When someone approaches you with emotional intensity, anger, blame, accusation, or an exaggerated list of your past mistakes, their goal isn't clarity. They aren't seeking solutions. They are seeking control of the emotional atmosphere. They want to dictate the tone, the pressure, the pace, and your internal state. And almost every man falls into the trap. Instead of observing the attack, he reacts to it. Instead of grounding himself, he gets pulled into the emotional current. Instead of maintaining control of the battlefield, he steps right into the ambush. He begins explaining, defending, correcting, apologizing, clarifying. Each word he speaks hands over more emotional territory. Each sentence signals that her emotional escalation has worked. This is why arguments spiral, not because the problem is big, but because the emotional power imbalance keeps shifting. But a man who uses strategic silence, he doesn't hand over anything, he doesn't fuel the fire, he doesn't validate the weapon, he doesn't give his emotional energy away like free currency. He understands something most people never learn. Where reactions end, manipulation dies. When you remove the reaction, you remove the leverage. You remove the oxygen from the flame. You break the emotional supply chain. Suddenly, the person trying to provoke you loses their footing. They don't know where the edges of your patience are. They can't predict how you'll respond. They can't measure your emotional temperature, your thoughts, your intentions. And that uncertainty destabilizes them. Because people depend on feedback loops to maintain control, but strategic silence removes the loop entirely. This is the moment when the psychological reversal begins. You can almost see it happening. First comes confusion. Why aren't you reacting? Then frustration. Why aren't you defending yourself? Then self-reflection. Was the escalation really necessary? Then self-awareness. They begin hearing their own tone clearly. And finally, self-regulation. They calm themselves because you didn't join the storm. Your silence becomes the anchor they have to adjust themselves around. It is not passive. It is not weak. It is directional dominance through stillness. And here's the deeper truth. People who escalate emotionally count on one thing: you losing your center. They count on you becoming reactive, defensive, loud, argumentative. Because once you lose composure, they have psychological leverage. They can redirect, distort, and overpower the situation. But when you remain unshaken, their entire strategy collapses. They realize you're not stepping into the arena. They realize you're not playing the emotional game. They realize you're not giving them the control they expected. And that realization forces them to face themselves. Strategic silence does not crush them, it reveals them. It exposes the difference between genuine emotion and manufactured emotion, fair criticism and emotional dumping. Communication and domination. Truth and projection. Most importantly, it reveals who takes responsibility for their own emotional regulation and who relies on others to regulate them. And in this revelation, something powerful happens. Your value increases, not because you dominated them, not because you won an argument, but because you demonstrated mastery over yourself. A man who controls his internal state becomes a psychological giant. A man who stays composed under pressure becomes rare. A man whose silence is stronger than another person's shouting becomes unforgettable. Strategic silence teaches people how to treat you. It teaches them what you respond to. It teaches them what you don't tolerate. It teaches them that chaos does not move you. Over time, the entire relationship transforms because your presence sets the emotional tone. People become more measured around you. They speak more respectfully. They approach conversations with more intention. They learn that emotional storms don't work on you. Not because you demanded respect, but because you modeled self-respect so powerfully that disrespect simply couldn't survive. This is the deeper essence of strategic silence. It is not a tool for winning arguments. It is a tool for shaping environments, boundaries, and dynamics without ever raising your voice. And once you master it, you never return to the old way of reacting. There comes a moment in every emotionally charged interaction where the balance of power quietly shifts. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's subtle, almost invisible, but the effects are enormous. When you stop reacting, something profound happens. The conversation stops being about you and starts being about them. Most conflicts escalate because both people keep feeding the fire. Her emotions rise, you respond, She escalates again, you try to explain, she digs deeper, you try to defend. And suddenly the argument grows into a monster that neither person intended to create. But when you use strategic silence, you do something radically different. You remove yourself from the emotional economy. You stop trading energy. You stop giving her reactions to feed on. And, the moment you do that, the dynamic flips on its head. 1. She loses access to your emotional state. Arguments are often less about the words being said and more about the emotional access one person has to the other. When someone can trigger you, they feel powerful, they feel influential, they feel validated. But when she cannot move you emotionally, no matter what she says, she loses that access. She can feel it, she sees it, she recognizes it instantly. Your calm presence becomes a wall she can't break through, and it forces her to confront a truth she rarely faces. You are not under her emotional command. This realization shakes her, because most of the time, people rely on reaction to control the situation. Without your reaction, her strategies stop working. 2. The emotional storm collapses without resistance. Every emotional argument needs two energies, one person who escalates and one person who responds. If the second energy disappears, the first one burns itself out naturally. Without your participation, the argument has no structure, no momentum, no direction. Her words lose their impact because they hit a surface that doesn't echo them back. Your silence tells her, you can express whatever you want, but you do not control how I respond. This ends the storm faster than any logical explanation ever could. 3. Her mind shifts from aggression to introspection. When she doesn't get the reaction she expected, her brain switches modes. The aggression stops making sense. The emotional attack loses rhythm. The intensity begins to feel uncomfortable, even to her. Suddenly, instead of focusing on your response, she begins focusing on her own behavior. Why am I yelling? Why is he so calm? Did I go too far? Why isn't he defending himself? Is this argument even valid? Your silence becomes a psychological mirror, reflecting her emotional chaos back at her with crystal clarity. 4. You create a boundary without speaking a single word. Most boundaries fail because they are delivered emotionally. A boundary spoken during anger sounds like a counterattack. A boundary spoken through frustration sounds like a negotiation. A boundary spoken while triggered sounds like a plea. But a boundary delivered through silence, that's a boundary saturated with power. It communicates, I decide when I speak, I decide what deserves my energy, I decide which battles I fight. There is no arguing with this boundary because it isn't verbal, it's behavioral, and behavioral boundaries are the strongest boundaries in existence. 5. Respect begins to form where chaos once lived. There is a simple psychological law. People do not respect what they can easily control. If someone can trigger you with a single sentence, they won't respect you. If someone can hijack your emotions instantly, they won't value your stability. If someone can pull you into arguments on demand, they won't see you as grounded. But when you demonstrate self-command, real, unshakable self-command, something shifts in the dynamic. Respect enters the room. Not because you demanded it, not because you argued for it, but because you embodied it. Strategic silence is the language of self-respect. It is the behavior of a man who knows his power, and it forces others to adjust themselves accordingly. 6. You take control without controlling her. A lot of men misunderstand power. They think it's about dominating the other person. It's not. Real power is not about controlling her behavior. It's about controlling your own internal environment. When you stay centered, composed, and silent, you gain control over the pace of the conversation, the tone of the environment, the emotional temperature, the direction of the interaction, the amount of energy you invest. You create a container where only constructive communication survives. If she wants to talk productively, she will calm down. If she wants to be heard, she will shift her tone. If she wants resolution, she will adjust her approach. But if she wants chaos, she will find no partner for it in you. That alone reshapes the entire relationship. 7. You become the emotional anchor of the space. Every relationship has one emotional anchor, the person who sets the tone. The anchor is the person who becomes the stable point around which everything else rotates. Strategic silence makes you that anchor. You become the gravity. You become the stability. You become the one who cannot be moved, shaken, or manipulated. This is why your silence is not empty. It is full of presence, full of power, full of psychological influence. And when she realizes she can no longer pull you off balance, she naturally gravitates toward your stability instead of fighting against it. This is how strategic silence doesn't just end arguments, it evolves relationships. There's a moment in a man's life when he realizes something profound. Not every battle deserves his words, not every accusation deserves his explanation, not every emotional storm deserves his participation. This is the moment he transitions from reacting to commanding. Because true strength isn't shown through volume, arguments, or comebacks, it's shown through restraint, through stillness, through the ability to observe chaos without letting it invade your inner world. This is the silence of mastery, the silence of a man who understands that his peace is not up for negotiation. 1. Why some women escalate harder before they calm down. When you stop reacting, when you stop feeding the emotional fire, some people panic. They're used to pulling strings and watching you move. They're used to seeing you defend yourself instantly. They're used to having access to your emotional switches. So when you suddenly lock down, something inside them scrambles. They push harder, they poke deeper, they escalate further. Not because they're right, but because they're losing control. This is their last attempt to break your silence, to drag you back into the arena, to make you play the emotional game again. But if you remain silent, calm, collected, unshaken, the escalation has nowhere to go but downward. It burns out. It collapses on itself. And eventually, she realizes the truth. You're not her emotional puppet anymore. 2. Why silence triggers introspection more than any argument. When you stop responding, she no longer has your energy to focus on. She is forced to confront her tone, her assumptions, her exaggeration, her emotional intensity, her behavior. See, most people use arguments to avoid self-reflection. Your responses distract them from seeing their own actions clearly, but silence removes the distraction. Silence forces her to hear her own words, without your reactions softening the impact. Silence forces her to see her own behavior, without your engagement absorbing the blame. Silence forces her to face the truth, without your explanations shielding her from it. This is why silence is not avoidance. Silence is not weakness. Silence is psychological clarity. It bends the emotional field back toward accountability. 3. How silence rewires the entire relationship. When strategic silence becomes your norm, when you stop reacting emotionally and start acting intentionally, the dynamic of the relationship naturally evolves. Arguments become shorter, accusations lose power, emotional chaos stops working, respect rises, communication improves, boundaries form without needing to be spoken. Because once she knows she cannot shake you, she stops trying. Once she knows emotional chaos doesn't move you, she chooses calmer communication. Once she knows you won't argue endlessly, she adjusts her tone. Your energy sets the standard, not by force, not by authority, not by domination, but by mastery of self. 4. The difference between coldness and controlled silence. Controlled silence is powerful. Cold silence is destructive. Controlled silence comes from confidence. Cold silence comes from bitterness. Controlled silence aims to create peace. Cold silence aims to punish. Controlled silence holds the door open for mature conversation. Cold silence shuts the door entirely. The goal is clarity, not cruelty. Presence, not punishment. Self-respect, not revenge. Strategic silence is calm, not icy. Grounded, not distant. Strong, not hostile. You're not shutting her out. You're refusing to participate in chaos. There's a massive difference. 5. What silence teaches her about you. Over time, she learns. You are not afraid of emotion. You simply won't drown in it. You are not avoiding conflict. You are avoiding unproductive conflict. You are not submissive. You are selective with your energy. You are not passive. You are principled. She learns that if she wants your attention, she must bring respect. If she wants communication, she must bring clarity. If she wants connection, she must bring maturity. Your silence becomes the filter. It separates emotion from manipulation, conversation from chaos, issues from drama. She learns to approach you with intentionality instead of intensity. 6. What silence teaches you about her? By saying nothing, you learn everything. You observe. Does she calm herself down? Does she take accountability? Does she switch to logic once chaos fails? Does she apologize or does she deflect? Does she communicate or does she attack? Does she respect your boundaries or push harder? Silence exposes character instantly. Reactions hide truth. Stillness reveals it. Because people show their real self when their usual behavior stops working. 7. Silence is your strongest negotiation tool. Not in arguments, in life. When you stop explaining yourself endlessly, people respect your decisions more. When you stop justifying every choice, people stop questioning your value. When you stop responding emotionally, people stop trying to control your emotions. You gain leverage simply by not being easily moved. You gain authority simply by not being easily provoked. You gain respect simply by not being easily accessed. This is why the strongest men speak less but mean more. Their silence has weight. Their presence has gravity. Their energy has structure. 8. The final truth. Power is not proven. Power is felt. The loudest person is rarely the strongest. The most reactive person is rarely the most secure. The most emotional person is rarely the most grounded. Power, real power, is silent. It's the calm in your chest, the discipline in your breath, the control in your choices. It's the ability to let someone rage while you stay centered. It's the ability to let someone misunderstand you temporarily because you're playing for long-term clarity, not short-term ego. It's the ability to walk away from chaos without needing the last word. This is mastery. This is emotional sovereignty. This is the silence that commands respect. Remember, true power is not shown in what you argue. True power is shown in what you refuse to argue about. True power is not measured by how loudly you speak. True power is measured by how little you need to speak. This is the silence that reshapes relationships. The silence that rewires dynamics. The silence that builds a peaceful life. The silence of a man who cannot be moved.